In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus.
Welcome to the Open Bible Podcast. My name is Jeremy Kaliba, and I am the lead pastor at Church of the Open Bible in Pinoga, Alberta. Thank you for joining our weekly devotional. Our associate pastoral intern, Ethan Jones, has been walking us through Psalm 25, and I've been looking at Romans chapter 5. And it's our prayer that you are challenged and encouraged by God's Word. As we go through life, there are at least two things we come to realize fairly quickly. These two things are that nobody's perfect and everybody dies. Now, this is pretty clear from experience. Sure, there are nice people, decent people, but none of them claim to have never had a selfish thought or said something hurtful or reacted poorly in a situation. All have sinned. Nobody is perfect. The second fact is equally apparent. Everybody dies. Ecclesiastes has been constant in reminding us of this reality, but in Romans chapter 5, verses 12 through 14, Paul doesn't just point out these basic facts. He is going to tell us why nobody's perfect and why everybody dies, and that these two things are connected. But he does so as an analogy to explain his main point, being how it is that we can receive Christ's righteousness and life. Paul begins in verse 12. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam, who was a type of the one who was to come. The analogy or comparison that Paul makes is between two great acts in human history. One is an act of disobedience, and the other an act of obedience. And the second act will be considered in the following verses. But first, Paul shows how the universality of death and sin can be traced back to the act of Adam. The act of disobedience to God's command in the garden, which brought about condemnation and death, not just for him, but for all of us, all mankind. Why all of us? Because of our union with Adam. Now it's here, if you're like me, you might want to protest. Why should something Adam did affect me thousands and thousands of years later? Why am I accountable? Because he was our representative. He stood for us. Humanity would be judged, just or sinful, on the basis of his obedience or disobedience to God's commands. Now, if we struggle with this concept, it's most likely because of our individualistic culture. But we get a glimpse of it if we think about living as citizens in a country. Our ambassador acts on behalf of our country, meaning that if he signs a document, he does so for each of the country's citizens, and we are bound by what he does, bound by his signature. And that is the nature of him as our representative. This helps to explain how it is that sin and death came into the world and spread to each of us. Adam, as our representative, sinned, and we inherited his sin nature and the consequences of sin, being death. Make no mistake, we still sin by choice, but we are all bound by our union with Adam. Again, if you're like me, you might protest one last time. How can that be fair? I didn't choose Adam as my representative. Well, Paul will talk about this more, but if you were given the choice to be judged in Adam or in yourself, who would you pick? Unfallen Adam in the garden, a perfect environment with a perfect companion, or yourself, sinful, constantly tempted, in a broken and desperate world. Surely it is the grace of God to judge us in Adam. If God judged us individually in ourselves, we would all inevitably perish. But more importantly, and this is the point Paul goes to next, because we have our union in one, we are able to have our union in another. Because we have been judged by our being in the first Adam, we may also be judged by our being in the second Adam and receive pardon. Let us not rush by the fact of our desperate need in these verses. The reality of the spread of sin and death. May it move us to cry out for mercy for ourselves and others. Mercy available only in the one who was to come. Again, thank you for joining me today with another edition of the Open Bible Podcast. Our intro music today was Morning Song by Antoine Bradford, and our closing music today is A Grief Observed by Heath McNeese.
Everyone I've ever known left me in my funeral clothes with nothing but a single rose to drop before the pine box closes. Lower down, lower down. And one day I will do the same. They beg me not to talk that way, but seconds pass and minutes fade, and time would never cower from the likes of me. So lower down. Mercy, oh my soul, oh my soul, oh my soul. If a coward dies a million times and feels the first plunge of the knife, every time he shuts his eyes and wakes the morning with his cries, then what am I, if not the same? I miss her unexpectedness, her faults and her resistances. If God remains persistent with the pain he brought her, how can I still pray to him? We're not the same. Mercy on her soul, on her soul, on her soul. She says she was at peace with God, though she knew that I was not. The chaplain gave his final thoughts. She exhaled and then smiled, but it was not for me. A grief observed. How wicked would it be for you to wish her back now that she's through, to pray her here once she's passed through, a ray of light between right now and evermore. A grief observed.